All right. What would you say to the accusations that various people within the structure of the church have taken steps to conceal and evidence of these crimes and move the perpetrators to other places where they could continue to conduct them?
And again, I'm going to have to be straight on this one. I won't be able to have any humor here. But it depends on the location. But definitely there are locations and there are places. And I'm thinking of, I can't think of the country's name right now. It's somewhere in South America where this is absolutely true. Where absolutely people in power use that power to cover up the crimes of people. That is a problem. And there's a theological problem to it, but there's also a practical human problem to it. And the practical human problem, the solution for that is therapy, jail time, whatever it is that has to be done to prevent the problem. But the theological problem is, and this is something that no one really has hit on when they've thrown this at me, but the theological problem is that we believe in forgiveness. The Catholic Church believes in absolute forgiveness. So how do you have that ethos and deal with the problem? For instance, the Seal of Confession. The Seal of Confession says you can't say anything that someone tells you, ever. So if you believe in absolute forgiveness and you have a rule that says you cannot break your silence, not even in a court of law, how do you deal with that problem? And I think the way they chose to deal with that problem was absolutely the wrong way to deal with it. I think that was the absolute wrong way to do. You should not just be moving people around. This happens, again, in education, where teachers will mess up and they just get moved over to another school. I think that's the wrong way to do it. You fire that person, you put that person into a prison. And this is something nobody brings up, but the Vatican is its own country. It's its own nation. Okay, so fine. You cannot put this guy in prison in his in whatever country he committed the crime because of the rules of whatever, right? Not that I know the rules, I'm just saying. Let's say there's some kind of stipulation where you can't go to court. Mm-hmm. Well, you can go higher up. You can go higher up the food chain and say, hey, to whoever's up higher next, whatever cardinal or whatever bishop, and go like, this guy's a problem. We need to take care of it. We need to put him on trial and take him back to Rome and put him in prison in Rome. That is something that nobody has suggested and nobody has done, but it's its own nation and has sovereign powers. I think it should have used those sovereign powers I think it should have used those sovereign powers in these circumstances, and I think it is a shame that it didn't.
Well, that's definitely an interesting perspective on it. That's something I'll need to think on more later. Let's move on from that quickly.
I appreciate that, thank you.
Yeah, well, I kind of had to bring it up, didn't I? I could have not done, but then everybody would say, well, why don't you bring that up? You got an actual Catholic on the line. Anyway, moving on. Well, moving on from Catholicism for now, let's go on to just religion in general as a subject.
That exists? I didn't know that.
Well, the overall just look at it from the outside. Okay. Let's say, would you say that organised religion has had overall a positive or negative or a neutral impact on the world?
You were on my OkCupid site, weren't you? Because that's actually one of the questions on there.
Oh.
No, I'll say this. To me, religion has had an overall positive point of view. But keep in mind that I'm coming from a perspective that I read a lot of ancient texts. So I've seen what religion was and what society was before it was organized. And if anybody thinks that it was peaceful and nonviolent before religion was organized, if you believe that everything was fine before weapons existed, it wasn't. You're wrong. People were horrible to each other before religion. And I'm not talking about the perspective from the Christians who wrote about it. I'm talking about when you read about the people who lived in those societies, reading their writings, whether you're talking about Rome, you're talking about Greece, whether you're talking about Mesopotamia, whether you're talking about ancient India, whether you're talking about ancient Japan, any of these places were horrible before the weapons were around. They were horrible before the religions were organized. And a lot of religion was organized to create an ethos and to prevent much of that horribleness from continuing. It was an answer. It wasn't a question. Religion, that is.
Okay. What do you think of what I would call biblical literalists and creationists and people of that nature, such as people like Ken Ham or Kent Hovind or people like that?
Well, I almost didn't hear the two words you just said because I'm thinking about a guy that I just listened to just before me and you got online here. Mm-hmm. I was listening to a program, and I won't name the program so it doesn't get any traction, but it was a religious program, and on it they had John MacArthur, I think that's his name, mm-hmm. and he was talking about how women should be relegated to certain roles. No. So my answer to people who think that way is no. The Bible is not 100% literal. There are literal aspects in the Bible. There are places the Bible where history starts. Specifically, the book's called The History. That's where you can start checking facts. And that doesn't even get into verifiable history until you get to the Moabites. Anything before that is completely unverifiable. Mm-hmm. So anyone talking about a literalist interpretation isn't reading the Bible. Also, there's the fact that, especially in Genesis, these are polemics against other religions. So the ideas and the facts are the accepted facts of the day. They're not the scientific accepted facts of the current. They're the accepted facts of the culture that they were saying these polemics to. Mm-hmm. So that is definitely, it's foolish when you take the Bible as 100% literal. That doesn't mean it's not true. Again, back to a previous interview, back to part one of this, it's talking about the different levels of truth. Mm-hmm. And if your level of abstraction is so low and you think that everything is real, where every metaphor is real, where every parable really happened, you get into problems like when you're dealing with people like Sam Harris who want to take that idea and twist it and use it against religion in general, not just Christianity.
Mm-hmm. So you would separate people with, going back to what you said before, mature and people with...
No, mature faith.
Yeah, people with mature faith. You would separate them from people who take it completely literally, and creationists and literalists and those people.
Well, I mean, I got to say two things on that. One, to say that I'm not a creationist is kind of wrong, because I do believe that God created the universe. It's just what I think of as God and what you think of as God are two different things. What it comes down to is what your idea of God is. If your idea of God is a man with a white beard controlling and fine-tuning and the great clockworker, then yeah, I don't agree with you. But if your idea of God is whatever it is that nothing came out of, whatever it is that was 3 seconds or 3 minutes or 3 hours before the Big Bang, whatever that existence was, if that's your idea of God, then me and you are on the same page. Mm-hmm. And whether you call that matter or existence or non-existence or antimatter, or I call that God, we can start having a conversation right there and then. But if you're talking about a man with blue eyes and a white beard who only likes certain groups of people, then we aren't talking about the same thing. Mm-hmm. I got a little sidetracked. Could you pull me back into the question, please?
My question was, do you separate yourself, people with mature faith, from the creationists and literalists?
Okay, so on mature faith, though, that doesn't mean that someone who's a literalist and a creationist can't have a mature faith. That doesn't mean that, okay? But to find somebody who's in that mindset who has a mature faith, you're going to have to find someone who, and this is going to sound insulting, but someone who basically brainwashed themselves through the dogma and doctrine that they've gone through. So you're going to have to find someone who has had no exposure to science, someone who has read everything literal and has interpreted their understanding through other literal lenses. So this is someone like James White. This is someone like John MacArthur. To say that they don't have mature faith would be foolish. They clearly know what they're talking about. Now, whether or not there's a little bit of, con artistry involved, maybe they're trying to get some money, that's a thing. There are people like those televangelists who want to do pay for pray kind of prosperity gospel. Okay, mm-hmm. So when you get into the prosperity gospel, you're talking about straight up con artists. Okay, you're talking about people taking advantage of the weak-minded to take their money. Mm-hmm. No, that's ugly and horrible. But when you're talking about guys like James White, you're talking about someone who has read and has studied, and he can back up every single one of his claims, and he can use a truth tree or he can use symbolic logic to prove God's existence. Now, that doesn't mean that me and him are on the same page. In fact, I don't like half the things he says. But to say that his faith isn't mature would be false on my end. So it is possible to believe in the wackiest supernatural thing and still be of a mature faith. It's just the more wacky your belief, the more rare that maturity is going to be found.
If we define a creationist as someone who reads the Bible literally, believes in the 6-day creation thing, the dinosaurs on Noah's Ark, that kind of stuff, and believes that
crazy people,
believe that literally. How do you respond to people like that? Do you?
Well, I started, and I hate to plug my stuff on someone else's channel, but I'm going to have to for this answer.
Mm-hmm.
I started a Bible study series where I am currently going through the Bible line by line, and every time I hit a metaphor or something that has 10 layers of meaning, I simply explain every layer of meaning. Mm-hmm. Unfortunately, unlike my Quran study and unlike my political and atheist-related stuff, those videos are not as popular. Mm-hmm. So no one's really... I got an audience that's very tiny watching those videos, so very few people being exposed to these ideas. But the Catholic Church, going all the way back to the Church Fathers, and by the Catholic Church, I don't mean the Roman Catholic Church. I mean the Catholic Church when it was one whole church. That means Orthodox, Coptic, and everybody was one.
Mm-hmm.
Those Church Fathers addressed much of this stuff in the 1st and 2nd century AD. So this stuff was metaphored long before the year 2000. So this stuff has been metaphored for a very long time. And it's just people refusing to read these ancient Church Fathers who take them seriously.
Well, that's all my questions done for now. Thank you very much for coming on and talking with me.
You're welcome, man. This has been fun.
Yeah. I hope we can have another discussion again.
Definitely.
All right. Thanks for watching, everyone. The previous and other half of this video will be on Alpha4's channel. That'll be him asking me various questions related to my position as an atheist and related subjects. Thanks for watching, everyone, and good night.